Whether you're switching careers after a decade or so of doing something else, or you're fresh out of school or otherwise early on in your career, finding that first job a developer can feel daunting. Where do you even start? How do you know which position to apply to? How do you build your skills to be attractive to an employer? Rissa, you've been an incredible advocate for developers who are earlier in their career by sharing what you've learned and by encouraging folks who are about to embark on their own adventure in becoming a Laravel developer. When you talk to people who are trying to find their first job, what advice do you give them? I know that's a big question, but let's just start with like, is there something immediately that comes to mind?
Yes, that is a big question, Dave. I think like one thing that's tough right now is that it was a hard market when I started. That was
Mm,
2020. But I would argue that it's been a harder market for the last couple of years. And
yeah.
I will say that it's changing. Like, I don't know
Mm.
how you're feeling about it being on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, so as we record this, we are in the middle of hiring for someone to come and help us work on Larajobs and HelpSpot and our other products, and we're getting a volume of applications that back when you and I worked together, and when we hired you far beyond even that. So very clearly, there are a lot of people out there who are a lot of devs out there who are definitely looking for work, and I can tell you one thing I've heard when you and I were at Laracon India, I heard this from people over and over again, is it's not just that people need jobs. Obviously, people need jobs. It's that it's maybe particularly hard out there right now for juniors, right? That when companies are looking to downsize, or if they're sort of changing what they're doing, or just outright like, not hiring or not growing, never mind downsizing, it sometimes is the junior position that's what gets cut first, right? Is that kind of what you're hearing as well?
Yes, I agree with you. So it's tough right now because I would say that it's a hard market for people. Part of my advice is to know it's hard, but think about what you can control. Like what can
Hmm.
you keep a handle on? What can you fix? Like what do you have control over? Because we can't fix the market right now. And whatever keeps you in the game, like
Hmm.
keeps you able to keep looking for jobs and hiring. So often that means not burning yourself out by going too hard immediately, especially because roles will open up at different times. Maybe the right role for you will open up later. So if you just burn yourself out too early in the
Hmm.
game, I think that that's going to be a recipe for disaster. Also, just being so desperate to get the first job, that can come across to employers and it's
Hmm.
not always going to send the signals that you want to send. So, whatever you can do to first set yourself up for success for staying in the game, I think that's probably the most important tip. But then again, what can we control? So there's a couple things we can control, which is awesome. Resume for sure.
Hmm.
But I want to start with cover letter because I
Hmm.
feel like this is fresh on your mind. And
It is.
um, before I start talking about some things that I think make a good cover letter, I'd love to hear some of the things that you think would make a good cover letter because you're reading a bunch of them right now.
I'm reading a lot of them right now. We are a smaller company. So I think one thing that's good to know, no matter if you're junior or wherever in your career, but especially if you're early on, if you're not used to applying and going through the process, is to understand that different sized companies are going to want different things out of a cover letter. The bigger the company, the more likely it is that somebody who's not immediately connected to the people you'll be working for, right? So the hiring manager, or maybe somebody in your team, that it will be somebody else outside of your team, whether they call it HR or they call it, the people team. There's lots of phrases and euphemisms for this now, but somebody else who's not technical will just say, will be reading it. And if that's the case, they might be scanning for keywords. They'll be looking for structure. They'll be looking for predictability. Conversely, the smaller the place that you're applying to, and big and small are relative terms, right? But I would say like any place where you're somewhat confident that somebody on the sort of development team or somebody close to the development team will be the first person reading it, that's a good sort of proxy for that. Maybe that's my opinion anyway. The more personal you want to get, and you want to, it's especially if you're going to apply to a bunch of them, it's okay to put yourself out there and to talk about yourself and to give them something to remember you by. You're not trying to fight through an automatic screen. You're not trying to fight through a keyword search in the same way. So I have, so obviously you and I worked at Titan together. Right now I work for Userscape, which makes layer jobs. Before that, I worked at the University of Connecticut here, obviously in Connecticut. I worked at Yale University, two very large organizations. Those were places where HR got the first crack at that cover letter. So if you're applying to a place like that, you probably want to structure it differently, right? That would be the first thing that I would say, is just know who your audience is, in a very long-winded way of saying.
No, I think that's great. And I think one other thing that you talked about that I'd love to give a little bit more highlight to is a lot of people first looking at you as a candidate are non-technical. They
Mm.
might be, like you said, the people team, the HR person. And so knowing how to speak to those people and communicate technical things in a non-technical way is extremely important. And also talking about like what you bring to the table, like why they should consider you. And if you're a junior developer looking for your first job, you don't have maybe the wealth of experience to draw from, but you can draw from personal projects, from you as a person and your character, and uh, just what drew you to that company. I know it's hard to think about those things when maybe you feel like you're applying to a bunch of places and it's like, I don't know, it's a job. I just want a job. But I would say like putting more effort into the jobs, like narrowing down your list a little bit and putting more effort into the jobs that you're really interested in is probably going to pay off more than just throwing resumes and cover letters at everything and anything and not putting as much effort into it.
Yeah, it's never been easier to apply to more jobs. I mean, especially, obviously, so we're Lara jobs. We think that people should post jobs there, but I'm no fool. People obviously post jobs on places, especially like LinkedIn, where it is so easy to hit a button and it just takes your LinkedIn profile. Right. So to me, that's a great example of, if you're applying for a place on LinkedIn, you want to make sure your LinkedIn is full of things that reveal more about yourself than maybe this little bit of experience you have, whether that's hobbies, whether that's personal projects or anything like that. Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to ask you about personal projects. Do you think that those are things that people earlier on in their career, if they're not quite sort of cracking that first job, if they're not able to get there, should they be focusing on personal projects, or do you think they should be focusing their time somewhere else?
Yeah, I definitely think that they should be focusing on some personal projects. One thing that could be helpful while job hunting is setting aside, some time boxing or just some time in different days for different aspects of job hunting. So
Mm.
obviously applying to jobs, cover letters, resume, like all of that stuff is important. But like taking time to not do that and work on a personal project, work on some of your technical skills, that will help you get closer to those jobs as you're applying. You really want not only your LinkedIn to tell them things about you and why they should consider you, you also want to make your GitHub or whatever you're using, Bitbucket, whatever, something that shows some of your work. And it doesn't have to be complicated work. It doesn't have to be, a job like company work. It could just be, I am working on this project. I'm learning these skills. I'm trying out things that are, techniques like how to do these loops, how to do, back end, front end, just showing them that you have some skills and that you're
Yeah.
working on them, because it's hard for them to take a chance on a new person. And so you want to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes to you. And a really fantastic opportunity, if I was going back and starting out fresh today, I would probably find some people, like networking is amazing to do regardless, but I'd find some people around my level and just see if we could do a couple projects together. The experience of working with other people using something like GitHub and version control, and maybe even like looking at the concept of like PRs, reviewing each other's code, like that work of building something together, it could take some of the edge off. You're not like struggling by yourself, you're learning together, but it also could just magnify all of your ability to show a cool project and get employers interested in you joining their team.
Yeah, and in terms of finding those people, you mentioned networking. I'm guessing part of your advice might be, if you're in a place that has local meetups of any kind, you would recommend that. Is there anything else that sticks out to you as here's a sort of something interesting to pursue with regards to networking? Is it conferences, even though those are expensive? Is it something online? Like, is there some place people should be focusing on?
Definitely in person, if you have that available, that can be a really great way to make some connections. But there are so many virtual events. General Assembly does a lot of events. There's, meetup.com, like it has like lots of groups. And so some of those are in person, some of those were virtual. Just seeing if there's Slack or Discord communities that are out there that you could join. A really fantastic way to find people around you going through the same thing you are is 100 devs. I wish that was something I had found when I was starting out, and that's a great way to connect with the community and find people who might want to work on a project with you. And it doesn't have to be complicated, but that concept of like
Right.
working together could be really useful.
And working together shows potential employers because that's what you're going to be doing in some way, right? Obviously, very big teams, you might be a little isolated. You might get a sort of a small piece of something when you first start working there, but you're still going to be working with people. You're going to be, whether that's pairing, whether that's doing pull requests, whether that's, whatever the case is, and showing that you know how to do that, even on a personal project level, is huge, right? It maybe hopefully gets a potential employer to sort of go, okay, this is somebody who, yes, we could try this, right? You just want to get them over that hump, right? Part of the goal, I'm guessing, is goodness, get to that interview, right? That's a whole other set of videos that we could do, but like just getting that interview, right? You want to get them to take a chance on contacting you.
Definitely. So I feel like this could be a great way to just give yourself some people that will keep you in the game and help you when you're having low moments, maybe be able to cheer you on when you get that, interview or that first job. So I think that could be really helpful. Speaking of getting that first interview,
Hmm.
I think we definitely need to talk a little bit about resume. I see this from a lot of people. I love like reviewing resumes for people because I think it's a fun way to give back to other people.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of people just put everything on their resume. It's like they
Hmm.
think that they're supposed to be like, this is all the jobs I've had ever in my life here
Yeah.
on this resume. And I just completely disagree. Like LinkedIn could have that if you wanted, but resume, every inch of real estate, make sure it has impact, make sure it's useful, don't have fluff, because you are losing out on keeping their attention if you put distracting things.
Yeah.
And for people looking for their first job, there might be less to work with. So you might be like, oh, I need to put more things. And that's just completely the opposite. Maybe put some projects and write some information about what makes them interesting and what you've learned from them. Maybe include a job that's non-technical, but only if it's going to show off something useful about you. Like,
Right.
you did something in leadership, did something that was outside the norm and shows
Yeah.
who your character is. And you definitely want to make sure that you're showing like what you contributed, what problems did you solve, like what's the impact of your solutions. Really just make it impactful with every sentence that you include. And for smaller companies, maybe like Userscape, maybe just if they're not asking for a cover letter, maybe put a paragraph at the top and just say who you are, like why they should talk to you and
Right.
why you want to work for them.
Yeah, I would say the earlier I've seen a lot of statements or about me's at the top of resumes. It's interesting how that has become a trend. And to me personally, I would say the earlier in your career you are, that probably makes more sense, right? Because you are trying, a resume is just a part of the whole package, but you're telling a story about yourself. It's not, I'm not saying it's fabricated, but it's a story, right? You're choosing what parts to highlight, what's going to be interesting for this particular employer. And, the one thing I was going to say, you were talking about all of your experience. I agree. You definitely don't need all the experience. I would also say that you do want to show some experience, right? Because if you're so early in your career and maybe this is your first like dev, you don't want to have like nothing, because then some people might look at that and go, do they know how to work with people? Like, you do, it is helpful to sometimes show that, but that can be part of the story, right? Especially if you compare that with a cover letter, right? If it's like worthwhile, it's like, I worked here for 3 years and, I learned how to communicate clearly with customers, or I learned like that stuff matters, right? If you're going to be in a dev role where you might have to talk to customers, like you can connect those things for sure.
Definitely. I'm not saying don't put any
Oh yeah, no,
experience,
I know you're not. I just wanted to make sure.
but I definitely see people who put like everything and they're like, when I was in college, I worked for like this fast food restaurant. And it's like, that's just not going to, they're not going to care about that unless
Yeah.
you communicate why they should care about that. Like you were managing people or something. And I definitely think that you can highlight your projects a little bit in the way that you would have highlighted technical jobs. Like if you've gotten your first or
Yeah.
second technical job, you can use that. And I really think it's helpful to emphasize like what skills or technology that you feel really proficient with and what you feel just kind of familiar with. It gives them an idea of like what you can work with and
Yeah.
maybe tailor that to which job you're applying to. If you feel like you have a lot of range of stuff that you're willing to learn, maybe just like tailor it to the job.
Right.
If it's a front end job, put front end technology.
For sure. For sure. One final question for you, Rissa. Is there something that you see people doing that they should stop doing when they're trying to get their first job? You had mentioned before when we first started, you want to focus on things that are within your control. So maybe it's don't focus on things that aren't within your control, but is there something specific that comes to mind where you're like, this is really common. Maybe it's tempting to do this. Maybe you think it makes sense to do this, but it's counterproductive.
Maybe this is more of a start doing this.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Yeah.
Once you start looking for jobs and figuring out some of the ones that you are more interested in, make sure to not just apply. Like see if you can connect with people who are at that company. Like for example, at like Userscape, like you are a great person to talk to and maybe just, say like, "Hey Dave, I would love to tell you why I think I would be a great fit for Userscape or something." And
Hmm.
like, maybe you're busy and you're not able to do it, but maybe you are. And I think
Right.
a lot of people miss out on that human connection of just saying like, "I really like this. I would really like this opportunity. Let me tell you why this would be a great fit for both of us." So going on LinkedIn and seeing people who work for the company and seeing if you could have like a virtual chat with them and maybe if they could pass your resume along to the hiring manager or something, but also you find out if it is actually a company you would want to work for. That's a great way to do research about the company. The stop for this though is I have heard of people getting too aggressive with this with some people at a company. So I guess do this, but
Yeah.
don't just like be at people's door ringing it every morning at 6 a.m. because they are going to take your resume and put it in the
Right.
trash if
Right.
they
Right.
get annoyed.
Yes, I've seen that aggression myself this week, and I get it, right? People want jobs, and if you think this is a job that you're really excited about, you want to show, hey, I'm interested. But, try to know your audience a little bit. So, yeah, that's all very good advice.
Yeah, like, you can reach out to the people behind the company, but know that there are humans with a lot going on in their life and they may not be able to get back to you. They might not be able to meet with you. Make it easy on them. Just be like, if you have time to meet with me, I'd love it. Here's my Calendly. If not, here's like some bullets of like why I think I'd be a good fit or, something just so
Yeah.
that if they can't meet, they have a little more information.
Yeah, absolutely.